When my son's fourth grade teacher looked me dead in the eye and said maybe if his real mother actually cared about him, he wouldn't be such a problem, she had no idea she was about to discover something that would change everything. What happened next left her speechless and scrambling to save her career. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I got the call from Riverside Elementary. The secretary's voice was clipped and professional, but I could hear the underlying tension. "Mrs. Patterson, we need you to come in immediately. There's been an incident with Ethan." My heart dropped. Ethan had been struggling since we moved to Millbrook 6 months ago. The transition from Chicago to this small Pennsylvania town hadn't been easy for either of us, but especially not for my 8-year-old son. New school, new faces, and that particular brand of small-town curiosity that seemed to follow us everywhere. I threw on the first clothes I could find and drove 15 minutes to school, my mind racing through possibilities. Had he gotten into a fight? Was he hurt? The knot in my stomach tightened with each passing mile. The principal's office felt smaller than it should have, cramped with tension and the smell of industrial coffee. Mrs. Henderson, the principal, sat behind her desk looking uncomfortable. Across from her, in one of those plastic chairs that seemed designed to make parents feel small, was Miss Victoria Clemens, Ethan's teacher. Miss Clemens was everything I wasn't. Perfectly pressed blazer, hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of stern expression that probably worked wonders on misbehaving children. She'd been teaching at Riverside for 12 years, according to the school website, and had the reputation of being strict but effective. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Sarah," Mrs. Henderson began, gesturing for me to sit in the remaining chair. "We have a situation that needs to be addressed." I looked around the room. "Where's Ethan?" "He's in the nurse's office," Miss Clemens said curtly, calming down. The way she said it made my protective instincts flare. Calming down from what, exactly? Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "There was an incident during math class this morning. Ethan became disruptive." "Disruptive how?" Miss Clemens leaned forward, her voice taking on that particular tone teachers use when they're about to deliver bad news. "He threw his textbook across the room, knocked over his desk, and started screaming at me when I asked him to solve a problem on the board." I felt my cheeks burn. This wasn't like Ethan at all. Sure, he'd been quieter since the move, more withdrawn, but violent outbursts weren't his style. Did something happen to trigger this? Did another student say something to him? "That's what we're trying to understand," Mrs. Henderson said diplomatically. Miss Clemens, however, had no interest in diplomacy. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been teaching for over a decade, and I can usually spot the root of behavioral problems pretty quickly. Ethan has been struggling academically and socially since he started here. He's often distracted, doesn't complete assignments, and frankly, acts out when he doesn't get his way." I felt my jaw clench. He's had a lot of changes recently, moving across the country, starting at a new school. It's been an adjustment period. "Children are resilient," Mrs. Henderson replied with a dismissive wave. "What they need is structure and consistency. What I'm seeing with Ethan suggests deeper issues at home." The room went dead silent. Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. But Miss Clemens wasn't done. "I've noticed he never talks about family activities, doesn't bring in family photos for our sharing days, and seems unusually attached to you in an almost desperate way. When I asked the class to draw pictures of their families last week, he drew himself standing alone." My heart was pounding now. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," she said, her voice growing colder. "I'm stating facts. This morning, when I asked him why he wasn't paying attention, he said he was worried about you being sad. When I told him that wasn't an appropriate excuse for not focusing on his work, he became defensive and said I didn't understand because his mom loved him no matter what." She paused, and I could see the calculated cruelty building in her eyes. "That's when I told him that maybe his real mother actually cared about him, he wouldn't be acting out like this." Maybe if she hadn't abandoned him, he'd know how to behave properly in school. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Mrs. Henderson gasped audibly and started to speak, but Miss Clemens held up her hand. I know it sounds harsh, but sometimes children need to face reality. Ethan clearly has abandonment issues, and coddling him isn't going to help him adjust to the real world. I stood up, slowly, my legs shaking. How dare you? Excuse me? How dare you speak to my child that way? How dare you make assumptions about our family, about his background, about anything? Miss Clemens crossed her arms. Mrs. Patterson, I understand you're upset, but denial isn't going to help Ethan. The signs are all there. The behavioral issues, the attachment problems, the academic struggles. These are classic symptoms of children who've been through traumatic separations from their birth parents. Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice. Victoria, perhaps we should— No, I said, my voice stronger now. Let her finish. I want to hear exactly what she thinks she knows about my son. Miss Clemens looked almost triumphant. I think Ethan is a child who's been shuffled around, possibly through multiple foster homes or temporary guardians, and he's never learned proper coping mechanisms. I think he's testing boundaries because he doesn't trust that you'll stick around either. And I think the kindest thing we can do is help him understand that acting out won't bring back whoever left him. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on Mrs. Henderson's wall, could hear the distant sound of children playing at recess, normal sounds of a normal day, while my world tilted off its axis. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. Miss Clemens nodded smugly, as if she'd just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. But you're wrong about everything else. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, extracting a folded piece of paper that I always carried with me. My hands were trembling as I unfolded it and placed it on Mrs. Henderson's desk. This is Ethan's adoption certificate, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Would you like to read the date? Miss Clemens leaned forward, clearly expecting to vindicate her assumptions. But as her eyes scanned the document, her expression shifted from smugness to confusion, then to something approaching horror. This says he was adopted at 3 days old, she whispered. That's right, 3 days old. I was there when he took his first breath. I was the first person to hold him, the first person to feed him, the first person to sing him to sleep. My voice was gaining strength with each word. I am his real mother, Miss Clemens. I've been his mother since the moment he was born. Mrs. Henderson reached for the document with shaking hands. Her face went pale as she read the details. Sarah, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said, never taking my eyes off Miss Clemens. Because unlike some people in this room, I don't make assumptions about families I know nothing about. Miss Clemens was scrambling now, her professional composure cracking. Adoption at birth is there are still adjustment issues that can arise from— Stop talking. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I was beyond caring about politeness. You told my 8-year-old son that his mother didn't love him. You told him he was abandoned. You traumatized a child based on your prejudiced assumptions about what adoption looks like. The teacher's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria Clemens was speechless. Do you want to know why Ethan drew himself standing alone? I continued. It wasn't because he felt abandoned. It's because his father, my husband of 10 years, is deployed overseas with the Marines. He's been gone for 8 months. That's why we moved here, to be closer to my sister while David's stationed in Germany. Oh my God. Do you want to know why he doesn't bring family photos to share the day? Because every single picture he has of his dad makes him cry. Because he misses him so much that some days he can barely get out of bed. And do you want to know why he was worried about me being sad? Because yesterday was the anniversary of my miscarriage, the pregnancy loss that led us to pursue adoption in the first place. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The silence in the room was suffocating. Miss Clemens looked like she might be sick. Ethan doesn't have abandonment issues, Miss Clemens. He has a deployed father, a grieving mother, and apparently a teacher who thinks it's appropriate to psychologically abuse children based on her own biases about adoption. I picked up the adoption certificate and carefully folded it back into my wallet. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a cold, steady fury. I want to see my son now. Mrs. Henderson stood immediately. Of course. Sarah, I am so deeply sorry about this misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I cut her off. This was a teacher making cruel, uninformed judgments about a child and then weaponizing those judgments to hurt him. Miss Clemens finally found her voice again, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I was trying to help him face reality. Whose reality? I spun around to face her. Your reality where adopted children are damaged goods? Your reality where loving parents are somehow less valid because they didn't contribute DNA? Your reality where it's acceptable to tell a child his mother doesn't love him? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Let me tell you about our reality, Miss Clemens. Our reality is that I spent 2 years trying to conceive, went through 4 miscarriages, and then waited 18 months for an adoption match. Our reality is that when Ethan's birth mother chose us, she chose us specifically because she wanted her baby to have parents who would love him unconditionally. I walked closer to her chair, and she actually leaned back. Our reality is that I have been up every single night for 8 years when he had nightmares, held him through every fever, celebrated every milestone, and loved him with every fiber of my being. Our reality is that when he takes his first steps, loses his first tooth, graduates from high school, gets married, and has children of his own, I will be there as his mother. Not his adoptive mother, not his real mother, his mother. Tears were streaming down Miss Clemens' face now, but I wasn't finished. And our reality is that today, you took that beautiful, loving child and made him question the one constant in his life, his mother's love for him. You planted seeds of doubt in an 8-year-old's mind about whether he's worthy of being loved. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat shakily. Sarah, what can we do to make this right? I looked between the two women. One was horrified and apologetic. The other looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. First, I want Miss Clemens removed from Ethan's classroom immediately. I don't want her teaching my son for another day. Sarah, surely we can work something out, Miss Clemens started. There's nothing to work out. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You hurt my child deliberately, and you did it based on ignorant assumptions about adoption. That's not a mistake. That's a fundamental character flaw that makes you unfit to teach children from diverse family structures. Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. We can arrange for Ethan to be transferred to Mrs. Rodriguez's class immediately. Second, I continued, I want a formal apology, not to me, but to Ethan. He needs to hear from an adult in authority that what was said to him was wrong and that he is loved and valued. Miss Clemens wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Of course, I'll talk to him right away. No, I said firmly. You've done enough talking. Mrs. Henderson will handle that conversation. I don't trust you alone with my child ever again. The principal nodded. Absolutely. I'll speak with Ethan personally. And third, I want documentation of this incident in Miss Clemens' personnel file. Other parents need to be protected from this kind of treatment. Miss Clemens looked up sharply. Mrs. Patterson, please. I made a mistake. I let my emotions get the better of me. But my career should have been something you thought about before you decided to emotionally abuse a child, I finished coldly. Mrs. Henderson was already reaching for a notepad. I'll make sure everything is properly documented. Now I want to see my son. The walk to the nurse's office felt endless. Each step carried the weight of what Ethan had endured, the confusion and pain he must be feeling. When I finally saw him sitting on the small cot, his face red and blotchy from crying, my heart broke all over again. Mom! He launched himself into my arms with such force that I nearly lost my balance. I'm here, baby, I'm here. She said you didn't love me. He sobbed into my shoulder. She said my real mom didn't want me. I held him tighter than I ever had before, feeling his small body shake with each sob. That was wrong, Ethan, so very wrong. I am your real mom, and I have loved you since before you were even born. But she said, I know what she said, sweetheart, and she was completely wrong. I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, those same green eyes that had captivated me the moment the nurse placed him in my arms 8 years ago. Do you remember the story I always tell you about the day you were born? Ethan nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. His voice was small but steady. You said you waited in the hospital for 2 whole days because you were so excited to meet me. And when I was born, you cried happy tears because I was finally here. That's right. And what else? You said you knew right away that I was meant to be your son, that God picked you special to be my mom. I kissed his forehead. Every single word of that is true, Ethan. Miss Clemens doesn't know our story. She doesn't know that your birth mother, Jessica, spent months getting to know me and Daddy before you were born. She doesn't know that Jessica chose us because she could see how much we already loved you. The school nurse, Mrs. Kim, had been quietly observing from her desk. She approached us with a warm smile and handed Ethan a juice box. Your mom is absolutely right, Ethan. I've been working in schools for 25 years, and I can tell you that love makes a family, not anything else. Ethan looked up at her gratefully, then back at me. Mom, why did Miss Clemens say those mean things? It was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain adult prejudice and ignorance to an 8-year-old without destroying his faith in teachers and authority figures? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, honey. Sometimes they think they understand something when they really don't. Miss Clemens made a very big mistake today, and she hurt your feelings because of it. But I threw my book and knocked over my desk, Ethan said quietly. I got really mad. And do you know why you got so mad? He thought for a moment. Because what she said made my heart hurt? Exactly. When someone says something that isn't true about the people we love most, it can make us feel angry and scared. Your reaction was normal, Ethan. What she said was not normal. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the doorway, her expression still troubled. Sarah, I've spoken with Mrs. Rodriguez, and she's prepared to have Ethan join her class starting tomorrow. She's also agreed to give him a few extra days to settle in without any pressure for assignments or participation. I looked down at Ethan. How does that sound, buddy? Mrs. Rodriguez teaches the other 4th grade class. I met her at orientation. She seemed really nice. Ethan considered this. Will she know that you're my real mom? The innocent question hit me like a punch to the gut. In the span of one morning, my confident, secure child had been made to doubt the fundamental truth of our relationship. She'll know that I'm your mom, period. No qualifiers, no explanations needed. Just your mom. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. Ethan, I want to apologize to you directly. What happened in your classroom today should never have happened. You are loved, you belong here at Riverside Elementary, and no teacher should ever make you feel otherwise. Ethan nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Can you go home now, Mom? He asked, tugging on my shirt. I don't want to be at school anymore today. Of course we can go home. As we walked through the school corridors toward the exit, I noticed other teachers and staff members looking at us with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Word travels fast in small schools, and I had no doubt that by dismissal time, every employee at Riverside Elementary would know about the incident. Just before we reached the main door, we encountered Mrs. Rodriguez in the hallway. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. When she saw Ethan, she smiled warmly. You must be Ethan, she said, crouching down to his eye level. I'm Mrs. Rodriguez, and I'm really looking forward to having you in my class tomorrow. I heard you're really good at creative writing. Ethan perked up slightly. I like writing stories about dragons. Dragons are fantastic. I love dragon stories. Maybe you could share one of your stories with our class sometime, if you'd like to. For the first time all day, Ethan smiled genuinely. Okay. Mrs. Rodriguez, I said, thank you for accommodating this transition on such short notice. She stood and looked at me directly. It's my pleasure, Sarah. Every child deserves to feel safe and valued in their classroom. I'll make sure Ethan has that with us. The drive home was quiet, except for the soft sounds of Ethan's favorite playlist. He stared out the window at the familiar streets of Millbrook, and I could see him processing the day's events in the way children do, compartmentalizing the hurt while trying to make sense of the adult world's complexities. When we pulled into our driveway, Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't immediately get out of the car. Mom? Yeah, buddy. Are you going to tell Daddy what happened? The question caught me off guard. David and I had always been completely honest with Ethan about his adoption, but we'd also been careful to present it as the beautiful, intentional process it had been. The idea of telling my husband that someone had weaponized our son's adoption story felt overwhelming. Do you want me to tell him? Ethan considered this seriously. I think yes, but not the part about me throwing things. He might be disappointed in me for not controlling my temper. My heart ached. Even after everything that had happened, my 8-year-old was worried about disappointing his father. Ethan, Daddy would never be disappointed in you for standing up for our family. He would be proud that you defended me, even if your emotions got the better of you. Really? Really. In fact, I think Daddy would probably want to have some words with Miss Clemens himself if you were here. This made Ethan giggle, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him all day. Can we make cookies when we get inside, he asked suddenly. Absolutely. What kind? The ones with the chocolate chips and the sprinkles on top. Those are Daddy's favorites. I know. Maybe, if we make them, it'll be like he's here a little bit. I had to bite my lip to keep from crying. My resilient, thoughtful son was already finding ways to heal from the day's trauma by connecting with the father he missed so desperately. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar, cracking eggs, and talking about everything except what had happened at school. Ethan told me about the book he was reading, about a funny dream he'd had the night before, and about his plan to build a fort in the backyard when the weather got warmer. As the cookies baked, filling the house with their warm, sweet smell, I found myself marveling at his resilience. Children, I realized, have an incredible capacity for bouncing back from hurt when they feel secure in their foundation of love. That evening, after dinner and homework and the usual bedtime routine, Ethan crawled into my bed with his favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear that had been a gift from his birth mother. Mom, can I ask you something about Jessica? We'd always used his birth mother's first name when talking about her, at Jessica's own request. She'd wanted Ethan to know her as a real person, not just a concept. Of course, honey. Do you think she would be sad if she knew what Miss Clemens said today? The question took my breath away. In the midst of his own pain, Ethan was thinking about how the situation might affect the woman who had chosen to place him for adoption. I think Jessica would be very sad that someone hurt you with words about adoption, but I also think she would be proud of how brave you were today and how much you love our family. I wish I could tell her that I'm happy, that you and Daddy are the best parents ever. She knows, Ethan. Jessica knows because we send her letters and pictures every year, remember? She can see how loved and happy you are. He nodded contentedly and snuggled closer to me. Mom? Tomorrow is going to be better, right? Tomorrow is going to be much better. The next morning brought an unexpected knock at our door. It was barely 7:30, and Ethan was still finishing his cereal when I peered through the peephole to see Mrs. Henderson standing on our porch, looking uncomfortable in her business attire. I opened the door cautiously. Mrs. Henderson, is everything all right? Sarah, I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I need to speak with you before school starts. May I come in? Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I glanced back at Ethan, who was watching cartoons while eating, then stepped outside onto the porch instead. What's going on? Mrs. Henderson clutched a manila folder to her chest. I spent most of yesterday evening and this morning dealing with the fallout from what happened. There are some developments you need to know about. My heart started racing. What kind of developments? First, the good news. Miss Clemens submitted her resignation effective immediately. She won't be returning to Riverside Elementary. I felt a mixture of relief and surprise. She resigned? After our meeting yesterday, I had to report the incident to the district office. When they reviewed Miss Clemens' file, they discovered this wasn't her first complaint regarding insensitive comments about students' family structures. There was an incident 2 years ago with a child from a single-parent household, and another situation last year involving a student being raised by grandparents. The revelation hit me like a cold wave. Does she have a pattern of this behavior? It appears so. The district gave her the option to resign quietly or face a formal disciplinary hearing that would likely result in termination and impact her ability to teach elsewhere. I leaned against the porch railing, processing this information. So she's been doing this to other children? The previous incidents were less severe, and the families chose not to pursue formal complaints. But combined with what happened to Ethan, it painted a clear picture of someone who shouldn't be in a classroom. Part of me felt vindicated, but a larger part felt sick thinking about other children who had endured Miss Clemens' prejudices. You said there was good news and other developments. What else? Mrs. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. The district is conducting a full review of the incident. They want to interview you, Ethan, and any witnesses. Witnesses? It turns out several students heard what Miss Clemens said to Ethan. Their parents started calling yesterday evening after their children came home upset about what they'd witnessed. I felt my knees go weak. Other kids heard her tell Ethan that his mother didn't love him? I'm afraid so. And some of them went home very confused and upset. We have children in that class who are also adopted, children from divorced families, children being raised by relatives. Miss Clemens' comments affected more than just Ethan. The scope of the damage was becoming clearer, and it was overwhelming. What do the parents want? Most are supportive of you and concerned about Ethan, but what? The Washingtons, their daughter Emma was in the classroom. They're considering involving a lawyer. They feel the school failed to protect their child from witnessing traumatic behavior. My head was spinning. What had started as a horrible incident involving my son was now becoming a district-wide crisis. Mrs. Henderson, I never intended for this to become such a big situation. I just wanted my son protected from further harm. And you were absolutely right to advocate for him. The district recognizes that this situation could have been prevented if we'd addressed Miss Clemens' previous behavior more effectively. She handed me the manila folder she'd been holding. These are some documents you might want to review. Information about the district's investigation process, counseling resources for Ethan, and a formal apology from the superintendent. I opened the folder and scanned the first page. It was a letterhead from the district office, addressed to the Patterson family with an official seal at the top. Sarah, there's one more thing, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. The local newspaper got wind of the story. My blood ran cold. The newspaper? Someone, I don't know who, contacted the Millbrook Gazette. They're planning to run a story about teacher misconduct and adoption discrimination. They want to interview you. I sank into one of the porch chairs. Oh God, I don't want Ethan's story splashed across the newspaper. He's been through enough. You don't have to talk to them. But Sarah, you should know that if you choose to speak out, it might help prevent this from happening to other families in the future. Before I could respond, Ethan appeared at the front door in his pajamas, his hair still messy from sleep. Mom, you're talking really long out here. Are we still going to my new class today? Mrs. Henderson smiled at him warmly. Good morning, Ethan. Yes, Mrs. Rodriguez is very excited to meet you properly today. Is Miss Clemens going to be there? He asked with obvious anxiety. No, sweetheart, I said quickly. Miss Clemens won't be at school anymore. She decided to teach somewhere else. Ethan considered this news. Good. I didn't like how she made my tummy feel scared. Mrs. Henderson knelt down to his eye level. Ethan, you should never have to feel scared at school. Mrs. Rodriguez is going to make sure you feel safe and happy in her classroom. After Mrs. Henderson left, I helped Ethan get ready for school with a heavy heart. The weight of the situation was growing beyond what I'd anticipated, and I found myself questioning whether I'd handled things correctly. As we drove to school, Ethan was quieter than usual. Mom, are you in trouble because of what happened yesterday? The innocent question nearly broke my heart. No, baby, I'm not in trouble. Sometimes when adults make mistakes, other adults have to have meetings and fill out paperwork to make sure it doesn't happen again. Like when I break something and you have to fix it? Something like that, yes. I'm sorry I caused so much trouble. I pulled the car over and turned to face him fully. Ethan James Patterson, listen to me very carefully. You did not cause any trouble. You are not responsible for what happened. A grown-up made a very bad choice, and now other grown-ups are working to fix it. That is not your fault in any way. His eyes filled with tears. But if I hadn't gotten mad and thrown my book, then Miss Clemens still would have said those hurtful things to you. Your reaction didn't cause her words, Ethan. Her words caused your reaction. We sat in the car for a few more minutes while Ethan processed this. Finally, he nodded and wiped his eyes. Can we go meet Mrs. Rodriguez now? I want to tell her about my dragon story. Walking into Riverside Elementary felt different than it had the day before. Several teachers and staff members who normally offered polite smiles now looked at us with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity. I could feel the weight of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom was everything Miss Clemens had not been. Where Miss Clemens kept a sterile, strictly organized environment, Mrs. Rodriguez had created a space that felt warm and welcoming. Student artwork covered the walls, plants sat on windowsills, and cozy reading corners were scattered throughout the room. "Ethan, I'm so glad you're here," Mrs. Rodriguez said as we entered. "I saved you a seat right next to Marcus. He loves writing stories, too." A boy with dark hair and a friendly smile waved at Ethan from a desk near the window. "Do you really write dragon stories? That's so cool." For the first time since the previous morning, I saw Ethan's shoulders relax. "Mrs. Rodriguez," I said quietly, "thank you for making this transition so smooth for him." "It's my pleasure. Ethan, would you like to put your backpack in your cubby and then come tell us about one of your dragon adventures?" As Ethan excitedly moved toward his new desk, chattering with Marcus about mythical creatures, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, despite everything that had happened, we were going to be okay. That afternoon, as I was picking up groceries, my phone rang with an unfamiliar local number. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Millbrook Gazette. I was hoping we could speak about the incident at Riverside Elementary." My heart sank. I'd been dreading this call since Mrs. Henderson's warning that morning. "I'm not interested in speaking to the press about my son's situation." "I understand your hesitation, but Mrs. Patterson, this story is bigger than just your family. We've received calls from several other parents in the district who've had similar experiences. Your situation might be the catalyst needed to create real change." I stood in the cereal aisle, gripping my phone tighter. "What do you mean, other parents?" "Parents whose children have been subjected to inappropriate comments about their family structures. Single mothers, divorced fathers, grandparents raising grandchildren, same-sex couples. It appears this has been an ongoing issue that the district has been handling quietly." The weight of what she was saying hit me. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. I need time to think about this. "Of course, but Mrs. Patterson, these families are ready to speak up now. Because of your courage yesterday, sometimes one person standing up gives others the strength to do the same." After hanging up, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, my mind racing. When I got home, Ethan was in the backyard with my sister Rachel, who had come over to help with after-school care while I dealt with the ongoing situation. "How was his first day with Mrs. Rodriguez?" Rachel asked, as we watched Ethan chase our neighbor's cat around the yard. "Better than I hoped. He seems to really like her, and he made a friend already." "That's wonderful. And how are you holding up?" I filled Rachel in on the morning's conversation with Mrs. Henderson and the call from the reporter. My sister listened quietly, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. "Sarah, you know I support whatever decision you make, but I think you should consider talking to that reporter. I don't want Ethan's story exploited for news coverage. It wouldn't be exploitation if you control the narrative. Think about it. How many other kids are sitting in classrooms right now with teachers who think adoption makes them damaged? How many children from non-traditional families are being made to feel less than?" Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Sarah. This is Michelle Washington, Emma's mom from Ethan's class. Could we talk? Emma has been very upset since yesterday." I showed Rachel the message. "See," she said, "it's already affecting other families." I called Michelle Washington immediately. Her voice was strained when she answered. "Sarah, thank you for calling back. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from the school directory." "Not at all. How is Emma doing?" "She's been having nightmares. She keeps asking me if teachers are allowed to say mean things to kids about their mommies and daddies. Emma is adopted too. We brought her home from foster care when she was 6, and she's terrified that someone might say those same things to her." My heart ached for this family I barely knew. "I'm so sorry Emma had to witness that." "Sarah, what Miss Clemens said to Ethan was horrific, but Emma hearing it was almost as traumatic. She came home yesterday convinced that all adults think adopted children are unwanted. Have you spoken to the school about counseling resources?" "Yes, and they're being helpful. But Sarah, I want to do more. I want to make sure this never happened to another child. Would you be open to meeting with some other families who've had similar experiences?" 2 hours later, I found myself sitting in Michelle Washington's living room with 4 other parents. Each had a story of insensitive comments, inappropriate assumptions, or outright discrimination their children had faced in the school district. There was Marcus Thompson, a single father, whose son had been told by a substitute teacher that boys need mothers to learn proper behavior. Jessica and Amanda Chen, a married couple whose daughter had been asked repeatedly by a school counselor if she was confused about having 2 moms. And Robert Martinez, whose grandson had been told by a lunch monitor that real parents don't dump their kids on grandparents. "The common thread," Michelle said, "is that these incidents get handled quietly. The district apologizes, maybe moves the child to a different class, but the underlying problem never gets addressed." Marcus leaned forward in his chair. "My son Tyler is in high school now, but what happened to him in 3rd grade still affects how he interacts with teachers. He assumes they're judging our family before they even know us." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of for Emma," Michelle said. "And after what happened to Ethan, I realized we can't just stay quiet anymore." Jessica Chen spoke up. "The reporter called us too. She said if we all tell our stories together, it might force the district to implement real policy changes." I looked around the room at these parents, strangers 24 hours ago, now united by shared experiences of having their families judged and their children hurt. "What kind of policy changes are we talking about?" Robert pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've been researching this since the reporter called. Other districts have mandatory sensitivity training for all staff, clear protocols for addressing family diversity, and consequences for discrimination." "The current district policy is vague," Marcus added. "It talks about respecting all families, but doesn't define what that means or what happens when that respect isn't shown." Michelle looked directly at me. "Sarah, your situation with Ethan is the most egregious case we've heard about. If you're willing to speak publicly, it could be the catalyst for real change." I thought about Ethan upstairs at Rachel's house, probably building elaborate dragon worlds with his Legos, blissfully unaware of the adult conversations happening around his situation. "I need to talk to my husband first. He's deployed overseas, and I don't want to make a decision this big without him." "Of course," Michelle said, "but Sarah, I hope you'll consider it. Our children deserve better than what they're getting." That evening, after Ethan was asleep, I video called David. Despite the time difference, he answered immediately, his face filling the screen from his barracks in Germany. "How's our boy doing with the new teacher?" he asked without preamble. I filled him in on everything: Mrs. Rodriguez's welcoming classroom, the district investigation, the resignation, and the meeting with the other parents. David's jaw tightened as I spoke. "I wish I could be there to handle this myself." "You are handling it, just from far away. But David, I need to know how you feel about going public with this story." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him processing everything I'd told him. "Sarah, what that teacher said to our son was unacceptable. If telling our story prevents other families from going through this, then I think we have an obligation to speak up. Even if it means our private family business becomes public? Our private family business is that we love our son unconditionally and he loves us back. I'm not ashamed of that story, and I don't think you should be either. What if there's backlash? What if people judge us or Ethan gets unwanted attention? David leaned closer to the camera. Sarah, someone already judged us and hurt our son. At least this way, our story gets told by us, not by someone else's assumptions. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house thinking about everything that had happened in just 2 days. 48 hours ago, my biggest concern was helping Ethan adjust to his new school. Now I was considering becoming the face of a district-wide discrimination scandal. But as I thought about Emma Washington having nightmares, about Tyler Thompson still distrusting teachers years later, about all the children who might be sitting in classrooms tomorrow feeling ashamed of their families, the decision became clearer. I picked up my phone and called Jennifer Walsh. Miss Walsh, this is Sarah Patterson. I've decided I want to tell my story. The interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at a neutral location, the Millbrook Public Library. Jennifer Walsh had suggested it would be less intrusive than having reporters at our home, and I appreciated the consideration. I spent Wednesday night barely sleeping, second-guessing my decision and rehearsing what I might say. By morning, I was a bundle of nerves, but Ethan's cheerful chatter over breakfast reminded me why I was doing this. Mom, Marcus said his mom makes the best chocolate chip pancakes in the whole world, but I told him yours are better, Ethan announced, syrup dripping down his chin. That's very loyal of you, but maybe we shouldn't start pancake wars with your new friend's family, I laughed. Can Marcus come over this weekend? He wants to see my dragon collection. The normalcy of the conversation was both comforting and heartbreaking. While I was preparing to share our most painful moment with the world, Ethan was simply excited about making new friends. When I dropped him off at school, Mrs. Rodriguez pulled me aside. Sarah, I wanted you to know that Ethan is doing wonderfully. He's already becoming a leader in our classroom discussions, and the other children really respond to his creativity. Thank you. That means more than you know. I also wanted you to know that if you need any flexibility with his schedule while you're dealing with everything else, please don't hesitate to ask. Word was clearly spreading about the upcoming article, even though it hadn't been published yet. At noon, I met Michelle Washington and the other parents at the library. We'd decided to present a united front, with each family sharing their story to show the pattern of discrimination. Jennifer Walsh was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with short auburn hair and an earnest demeanor. She'd brought a photographer, which made the whole situation feel more real and intimidating. Mrs. Patterson, thank you so much for agreeing to this. I know it's not an easy decision. We settled into a quiet corner of the library's community room. Jennifer set up a small recording device and opened her notebook. Let's start with what happened on Tuesday morning. Can you walk me through the events leading up to Mrs. Clemens' comments? I took a deep breath and began recounting the story, starting with the phone call from school. As I spoke, I watched Jennifer's expression shift from professional interest to genuine shock. She said these things in front of other children? Michelle interjected. My daughter came home traumatized by what she'd witnessed. Jennifer turned to the other parents. And you've all had similar experiences in this district? For the next hour, each family shared their story. Marcus described his son being told he needed a mother figure. The Chens talked about constant questions about their daughter's real parents. Robert explained how his grandson had been made to feel like a burden.
What's particularly troubling, Jennifer said, taking notes rapidly, is that these incidents span different schools and multiple years. This suggests a systemic issue rather than isolated cases. That's exactly our point, Michelle said. Individual apologies and quiet transfers don't address the root problem. Jennifer looked directly at me. Sarah, your situation seems to be the most severe. How did it feel when you realized Miss Clemens had made these assumptions about Ethan's adoption? I paused, trying to find words for the rage and heartbreak I'd felt in that moment. It felt like someone had taken the most beautiful part of our story, the way Ethan came to us, how wanted and loved he's always been, and twisted it into something shameful. But what hurt most was knowing that Ethan would now question things he'd never doubted before. Has the school district been responsive since the incident? They've been apologetic and accommodating, but we're concerned about prevention rather than just reaction. How many other children need to be hurt before real changes are made? The photographer asked if we'd be comfortable with photos. I hesitated, thinking about Ethan seeing our faces in the newspaper. Would it be possible to keep Ethan's image out of this? I want to protect his privacy as much as possible. Absolutely. We can photograph you from behind or use shots that don't show faces clearly. After the interview, I felt emotionally drained, but also oddly relieved. Our story was out there now, beyond our small circle of family and school officials. That evening, Rachel came over to help with dinner while I processed everything that had happened. "How do you think it went?" she asked, watching Ethan play in the backyard. "Better than I expected." Jennifer seemed genuinely interested in creating change, not just sensationalizing our situation. And the other families? They're remarkable. It takes courage to speak up about these things, especially when you know it might make you a target for more scrutiny. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. "Sarah, just wanted you to know that Emma slept through the night for the first time since Tuesday. I think she feels better knowing we're doing something to help other kids." The comment reminded me why we'd taken this step. It wasn't just about getting justice for what had already happened. It was about preventing future harm. Friday morning brought the publication of the article. The headline read, "Local Parents Speak Out Against Family Discrimination in Schools." Jennifer had done an excellent job presenting our stories with dignity while clearly outlining the systemic issues we'd identified. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing before 8 a.m. with calls from other parents, advocacy groups, and even some reporters from larger newspapers. At school pickup, several parents approached me with words of support, but I also noticed some who avoided eye contact or seemed to whisper more than usual. The attention was exactly what I'd feared, but knew was necessary. Mrs. Rodriguez intercepted me before I reached Ethan's classroom. "Sarah, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've had some phone calls today, both supportive and critical. The administration is prepared to handle any disruptions, but I wanted you to be aware." Critical how? Some community members feel that making this public was unnecessary, that it should have been handled privately. Others are questioning whether the families involved are being too sensitive. I felt my stomach drop. Has any of this affected Ethan today? Not directly. The children don't really understand what's happening with the adults, but I did want you to know that we're being extra vigilant about protecting all our students from any spillover effects. When Ethan bounded out of the classroom, his backpack dragging behind him, he seemed completely oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him. "Mom, guess what? Mrs. Rodriguez said I can read my dragon story to the whole class next week." "That's wonderful, buddy. Are you excited?" "Super excited. And Marcus is going to help me drop pictures to go with it." Watching his genuine enthusiasm, I felt a renewed conviction that speaking out had been the right choice. Whatever criticism we faced, whatever uncomfortable attention came our way, it was worth it if it meant children like Ethan could attend school without fear of being shamed for their family structure. That evening, David called earlier than usual. "I saw the article online," he said without preamble. "Sarah, I'm so proud of you." "Really? I keep second-guessing whether we did the right thing." Look, some people are always going to criticize families like ours, whether we speak up or stay quiet. At least this way, we're fighting back. The school said there's been some negative reaction in the community. There's also been a positive reaction, right? You're giving other families permission to stand up for themselves. He was right. Along with the criticism, there had been an outpouring of support from families who'd experienced similar situations but had felt alone and powerless. "David, I miss you so much. I wish you were here to navigate this with me. I'm here in every way I can be. And Sarah, Ethan is lucky to have a mom who fights for him this hard." After we hung up, I checked my email to find dozens of messages from strangers sharing their own stories of family discrimination.
Each one reinforced that our decision to speak publicly had been necessary, even if it wasn't easy. 3 weeks after the article was published, I received a call that would change everything. It was Dr. Patricia Henley, the district superintendent, asking if I could attend an emergency school board meeting the following evening. Mrs. Patterson, the board has been reviewing all the feedback we've received since your story came out. We'd like you and the other families to present your recommendations for policy changes directly to the board. The community response had been more intense than any of us had anticipated. The original article had been picked up by state education publications and several parenting blogs. The school district's Facebook page was flooded with comments from current and former families sharing their own experiences. More importantly, the State Department of Education had launched an inquiry into the district's handling of family diversity issues. What had started as one teacher's cruel comment to one child had become a catalyst for examining educational policies across the entire region. The night of the school board meeting, the high school auditorium was packed beyond capacity. Michelle Washington and I had spent hours preparing our presentation, working with the other affected families to develop concrete policy recommendations. As I walked to the podium, I could see familiar faces scattered throughout the audience. Mrs. Rodriguez sitting in the front row with an encouraging smile, Mrs. Henderson looking nervous but supportive, and surprisingly, several of Ethan's new classmates' parents who had come to show solidarity. Members of the school board, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. 3 weeks ago, my son was told by his teacher that his mother didn't love him because he was adopted. Tonight, I'm here not just as Ethan's advocate, but as a voice for all the families in this district who deserve better. I outlined our 3 main recommendations: mandatory annual training for all staff on family diversity and cultural sensitivity, clear reporting procedures for families who experience discrimination, and a zero-tolerance policy for staff who make inappropriate comments about students' family structures. These aren't radical concepts, I continued. They're basic protections that should already exist in any school system that truly values all children. Michelle followed with statistics she'd compiled about the prevalence of non-traditional families in the district. Nearly 40% of students came from single-parent homes, blended families, families headed by grandparents, or adoptive families. We're not asking for special treatment, Michelle said. We're asking for the same respect and dignity that every family deserves. The public comment portion of the meeting revealed the true scope of the issue. Parent after parent stood up to share their experiences, not just with insensitive teachers, but with coaches, administrators, and support staff who had made assumptions or inappropriate comments about their family structures. One grandmother, raising her grandson after her daughter's death, described how a school counselor had repeatedly suggested that the boy needed to be in a more stable environment. A divorced father shared how his son's teacher had blamed the child's academic struggles on the broken home situation. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when 17-year-old Tyler Thompson, Marcus's son, who had been hurt years earlier, stood up to speak. "I'm graduating this year," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "For the past 8 years, I've watched my classmates get excited about family projects and school events while I dreaded them. Not because I'm not proud of my dad or our family, but because I never knew when an adult at school would make me feel like there was something wrong with us." He paused, looking directly at the school board members. No kid should have to feel that way. And if these policies had existed when I was younger, maybe I would have had a different experience in your schools. The board voted unanimously to implement our recommended policies, with implementation beginning immediately. But the victory felt bittersweet. It shouldn't have taken a public crisis to establish basic protections for children. 2 months later, I was folding laundry when Ethan burst through the front door, waving a piece of paper excitedly. Mom, look what Mrs. Rodriguez gave me." It was a certificate recognizing him as Student of the Month for his creative writing and leadership in classroom discussions. But more than the award itself, it was the accompanying note from Mrs. Rodriguez that made my eyes fill with tears. "Ethan has brought such joy and imagination to our classroom. His dragon stories have inspired other students to share their own creative ideas, and his kindness toward classmates has helped create the inclusive environment every classroom should have. You should be very proud of the remarkable young man you're raising." "I'm so proud of you, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Mrs. Rodriguez said I get to read my latest story at the school assembly next week. It's about a dragon who protects all the different kinds of families in the kingdom." The irony wasn't lost on me. The child who had been made to feel ashamed of his family was now writing stories celebrating family diversity. That evening, David called with news that made the day even better. "Sarah, I got my orders. I'll be home in 6 weeks." 6 weeks? I could barely contain my excitement. Are you serious? Dead serious. And Sarah, I've been following all the changes happening there through the news coverage. You've accomplished something incredible. We've accomplished something incredible. Your support from thousands of miles away made all the difference. I can't wait to meet Mrs. Rodriguez and thank her for taking such good care of our boy. She's become more than a teacher to us. She's been an advocate and an ally when we needed both. The night before David's homecoming, Ethan and I were making welcome home banners when he asked a question that surprised me. "Mom, do you think Miss Clemens knows that she was wrong about our family?" I stopped cutting construction paper and looked at my son. In the months since the incident, he had grown more confident, more secure in himself and our family. The scared, doubting child from that terrible Tuesday had been replaced by a boy who knew unequivocally that he was loved. He paused, looking directly at the school board members. No kid should have to feel that way. And if these policies had existed when I was younger, maybe I would have had a different experience in your schools. The board voted unanimously to implement our recommended policies, with implementation beginning immediately. But the victory felt bittersweet. It shouldn't have taken a public crisis to establish basic protections for children. 2 months later, I was folding laundry when Ethan burst through the front door, waving a piece of paper excitedly. Mom, look what Mrs. Rodriguez gave me." It was a certificate recognizing him as Student of the Month for his creative writing and leadership in classroom discussions. But more than the award itself, it was the accompanying note from Mrs. Rodriguez that made my eyes fill with tears. "Ethan has brought such joy and imagination to our classroom. His dragon stories have inspired other students to share their own creative ideas, and his kindness toward classmates has helped create the inclusive environment every classroom should have. You should be very proud of the remarkable young man you're raising." "I'm so proud of you, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. "Mrs. Rodriguez said I get to read my latest story at the school assembly next week. It's about a dragon who protects all the different kinds of families in the kingdom." The irony wasn't lost on me. The child who had been made to feel ashamed of his family was now writing stories celebrating family diversity. That evening, David called with news that made the day even better. "Sarah, I got my orders. I'll be home in 6 weeks." 6 weeks? I could barely contain my excitement. Are you serious? Dead serious. And Sarah, I've been following all the changes happening there through the news coverage. You've accomplished something incredible. We've accomplished something incredible. Your support from thousands of miles away made all the difference. I can't wait to meet Mrs. Rodriguez and thank her for taking such good care of our boy. She's become more than a teacher to us. She's been an advocate and an ally when we needed both. The night before David's homecoming, Ethan and I were making welcome home banners when he asked a question that surprised me. "Mom, do you think Miss Clemens knows that she was wrong about our family?" I stopped cutting construction paper and looked at my son. In the months since the incident, he had grown more confident, more secure in himself and our family. The scared, doubting child from that terrible Tuesday had been replaced by a boy who knew unequivocally that he was loved. "I don't know, honey, but I hope she learned something from what happened. I hope she doesn't say mean things to other kids about their families." Me too. That's part of why we told our story, to help protect other children. I'm glad we did it, even though it was scary sometimes. His simple statement encapsulated everything I felt about our journey. It had been terrifying to expose our private pain to public scrutiny, but the changes that resulted had made it worthwhile. 6 months after that awful day in the principal's office, Ethan's school implemented the new policies we'd fought for. Mrs. Rodriguez had been promoted to assistant principal, partly in recognition of her exemplary handling of our family's transition. And Miss Clemens, I later learned, had left teaching entirely and was working in administrative support at a private business. The most meaningful outcome, though, was personal. Ethan had not only recovered from the trauma of that day, but had grown stronger because of how we'd handled it together. He learned that families come in all forms, that love is what makes a family real, and that sometimes standing up for what's right requires courage. On David's first night home, as we tucked Ethan into bed together for the first time in 10 months, our son looked up at us with those same green eyes that had captivated me from his first day of life. "Now our family is complete again," he said simply. And as I looked at my husband and my son, this beautiful family we'd fought so hard to protect and defend, I realized that Ethan was absolutely right. We were complete, we were real, and we were exactly as we should be. The teacher who had tried to make my son question his mother's love had unknowingly given us something precious: the opportunity to prove that love, advocacy, and courage could create change that would protect countless other families from experiencing what we had endured. Sometimes, the most painful moments in our lives become the catalyst for the most meaningful changes, and sometimes, standing up for one child means standing up for all children. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.